The biting December wind swept through the narrow streets of Detroit's downtown, carrying with it the scent of snow and exhaust fumes. The city lights reflected off the icy pavement, creating a mosaic of colors that contrasted sharply with the gray reality of one of America's most challenging urban landscapes. It was the kind of cold that penetrated bones, the kind that made people walk faster, heads down, eager to reach the warmth of their destinations. In the heart of this frozen metropolis, two very different worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way. Before we continue with this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing that our stories reach people all over the world. And if you enjoy narratives that touch the heart and make you reflect on life, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss our next stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this tale. Khalid al-Rashid adjusted his Brioni suit as he stepped out of the Grand Marquis Hotel, one of Detroit's few remaining symbols of luxury. At 42, he embodied success in its purest form. His perfectly trimmed beard, designer watch worth more than most people's annual salary, and the confident gait of someone accustomed to having the world bend to his will, all spoke of a man who had never known failure. The son of a Saudi oil magnate, Khalid had built his own empire in international real estate, with projects spanning from Dubai to New York. Detroit was his latest conquest, a city ripe for revitalization, where abandoned buildings could be transformed into modern residential complexes for those willing to invest. His assistant, Marcus, a young African-American man with impeccable posture and an ever-present tablet, walked 2 steps behind him. They were heading to a crucial meeting with city officials, a negotiation that could unlock millions in tax incentives for Khalid's latest project, the Renaissance Towers, a billion-dollar development that promised to bring 3,000 jobs to the struggling city. The street was nearly empty. Most sensible people had sought shelter from the brutal cold. Khalid's leather shoes clicked against the frozen sidewalk as his breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. He checked his Patek Philippe watch impatiently. They were running 7 minutes ahead of schedule, which meant he had time to review the proposal one more time. That's when he saw him, huddled against the brick wall of an abandoned storefront. Barely visible beneath layers of tattered clothing, sat an elderly man. His weathered face, deeply lined and darkened by years of exposure to the elements, was partially hidden by a stained Detroit Tigers baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. A cardboard sign rested against his knees, the words barely legible in the dim light. Homeless veteran. Anything helps. God bless. Khalid's steps didn't slow. In his world, such sights were background noise. Unfortunate, but irrelevant to the trajectory of his day. He had seen poverty in many forms across many continents. It saddened him in an abstract way, but he had learned long ago that you couldn't save everyone. His charitable contributions, carefully managed by his foundation, went to established organizations with measurable outcomes. Random acts of charity on the street were inefficient and often enabled destructive behaviors. But as they passed, something unexpected happened. The old man looked up, and their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, Khalid saw something he hadn't expected. Not desperation, or the hollow, vacant stare he associated with chronic homelessness, but a clarity, an intelligence, almost a recognition. The man's eyes, a striking pale blue against his weathered brown skin, held his gaze with an unsettling intensity. Then the old man spoke, his voice rough but surprisingly strong. "You're going to need help soon, brother. When the moment comes, don't let pride be your prison." Khalid stopped mid-stride, caught off guard. Marcus nearly bumped into him. "Excuse me?" Khalid turned, his tone sharp with irritation and confusion. The homeless man shifted slightly, his movements stiff from the cold. A small, knowing smile crossed his cracked lips. "The meeting. It's not going to go the way you think. But that's not the end. It's the beginning. Remember that." Khalid felt a flash of anger. This was clearly some kind of scam, an attempt to unsettle him so he'd hand over money out of superstition or guilt. He'd encountered plenty of con artists in his time. He opened his mouth to deliver a cutting remark, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the absolute conviction in the old man's voice, or perhaps the fact that he hadn't asked for anything, hadn't extended a cup, or made any gesture toward solicitation. "Sir, we really need to go," Marcus interjected quietly, touching his elbow. Khalid nodded curtly and turned away, but the encounter left him unsettled. As they continued down the street, he couldn't shake the feeling of those pale blue eyes watching him and the strange, specific nature of the warning. How could a homeless man possibly know anything about his meeting? The municipal building rose before them, an imposing structure of limestone and granite that had witnessed Detroit's glory days and its subsequent decline. Inside, the marble floors echoed with their footsteps as they made their way to the third-floor conference room. Khalid pushed the strange encounter from his mind, refocusing on the task at hand. This meeting was critical. He had invested 18 months in preliminary work, had hired the best architects and urban planners, had crafted a proposal that would benefit both his company and the city. It was a win-win, the kind of deal that made everyone look good. The conference room was exactly as he expected, functional but worn, with a long table that had seen decades of negotiations. 4 city officials were already seated, including Deputy Mayor Christine Walker, a formidable woman in her 50s known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach to development deals. The pleasantries were brief, coffee was offered and declined, documents were distributed, and then, just as Khalid began his presentation, his phone buzzed. He ignored it. A cardinal rule in important meetings. It buzzed again and again. Christine raised an eyebrow. "Do you need to take that, Mr. Al-Rashid?" "No, my apologies," Khalid said smoothly, silencing the phone without looking at it. But Marcus, sitting beside him, had glanced at his own device, and Khalid saw his assistant's face go pale. The presentation continued for another 5 minutes before Marcus leaned in, whispering urgently in Arabic, "Khalid, we have a serious problem. It's about the Dubai accounts." Khalid's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Excuse me for just one moment," he said to the assembled officials, stepping out into the hallway with Marcus. What Marcus told him in the next 60 seconds shattered Khalid's world. His business partner in Dubai, a man he had trusted for 15 years, had embezzled nearly $80 million from their joint accounts, systematically draining funds over the past 6 months through a sophisticated network of shell companies. Worse, he had disappeared, leaving behind a financial structure so compromised that several of Khalid's major projects were now in jeopardy. The Dubai authorities had frozen his accounts pending investigation, a standard procedure that nevertheless left him in an impossible position. The Renaissance Towers project, the very deal he was negotiating at this moment, was funded in large part by credit lines, backed by those now frozen assets. Without access to those funds, without the ability to prove his liquidity, the deal was effectively dead. Khalid felt the room spin slightly. In his entire adult life, he had never experienced a moment like this. The homeless man's words echoed in his mind with eerie precision. "The meeting, it's not going to go the way you think." He returned to the conference room and, with a professionalism that cost him dearly, explained that an urgent business matter required his immediate attention. He would need to reschedule. The disappointment in Christine Walker's eyes told him everything. In the cutthroat world of municipal development, delay was often synonymous with death. Another developer would swoop in. The opportunity would evaporate. As he and Marcus left the building, Khalid felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine fear. Not the thrill of a risky business venture, but the cold, creeping terror of losing everything he had built. The following 72 hours were a nightmare of international phone calls, emergency meetings with lawyers, and desperate attempts to liquidate assets quickly enough to maintain his various projects. But the Dubai situation was worse than initially reported. The embezzlement had been so thorough, so carefully planned, that Khalid's entire financial house of cards was collapsing. Projects in 3 countries were now at risk. Contractors were threatening to walk. Investors were demanding answers. By the 4th day, Khalid found himself in a position he never could have imagined, temporarily cashless in a foreign city. His credit cards declined as banks scrambled to assess his situation. His reputation in tatters as news of the Dubai scandal spread through industry channels. He was sitting in his hotel room, which he had managed to keep for now by promising payment within days, when Marcus entered with more bad news. "The hotel wants us out by tomorrow if we can't settle the bill. It's $18,000 for the week." Khalid laughed bitterly. A week ago, $18,000 was what he spent on a dinner without thinking. Now, it might as well have been 18 million. "And there's something else," Marcus continued reluctantly. "My family, they need me back in Detroit. My mother's sick, and with everything that's happening, I can't. I'm sorry, Khalid, but I have to resign." Khalid nodded slowly. He couldn't blame the young man. "I understand. Thank you for everything, Marcus. You've been loyal." After Marcus left, Khalid sat in the growing darkness of the hotel room, watching the city lights flicker on as evening descended. For the first time in his adult life, he felt utterly alone. His wife was in Dubai, their marriage more arrangement than partnership, and he had no family in the United States. His business associates, once so eager for his attention, now avoided his calls. The next morning he checked out of the hotel, using the last of his available credit to pay the bill. He had one suitcase, his phone that would soon be disconnected, and a laptop that held the digital remnants of his empire. He sat in the hotel lobby for a long time, trying to formulate a plan, any plan, that would dig him out of this hole. That's when he remembered the homeless man. It was absurd, of course. What could a street beggar possibly do to help him? But the man's words had proven eerily prophetic, and Khalid found himself with nothing to lose. Pride, the man had said. Don't let pride be your prison. Walking through Detroit's downtown in the gray light of late morning, Khalid realized how different the city looked from ground level, truly on the ground level, rather than observed from the window of a luxury car or the heights of a penthouse suite. He saw the closed storefronts, the people hurrying past with their own burdens, the subtle geography of urban poverty he had never really noticed before. He found the spot where he'd seen the homeless man, but it was empty. Of course it was. Why would the man still be there 5 days later? Homeless people moved around, sought shelter, followed resources. Khalid was about to turn away when he heard a voice, wondered when you'd come back. He spun around. The homeless man was emerging from an alley carrying 2 paper coffee cups from a nearby convenience store. He looked exactly the same. Layers of worn clothing, the tiger's cap, those penetrating blue eyes, but something about his posture seemed different, less defeated, almost expectant. You, Khalid said, unsure how to continue. Me, the man agreed. He held out one of the coffee cups. Figured you could use this. You look like you've had a rough week. Khalid took the cup automatically, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. How did you know about the meeting? The old man settled himself against the same wall, gesturing for Khalid to sit beside him. After a moment's hesitation, Khalid did, not caring that his expensive suit was touching the dirty pavement. Didn't know anything specific, the man said, but I've been watching people for 40 years on these streets. You learned to read them. You had that look. The one men get when they're about to learn that the world don't bend to their will as easy as they think. Happens to everyone eventually. The lesson's just harder for some than others. Are you? Khalid paused, unsure how to phrase the question. Are you really homeless? The man chuckled. A dry sound like rustling leaves. Depends on how you define home. I got no house, if that's what you mean. But this city, these streets, they're more mine than any place with walls ever was. Who are you? Name's Thomas. Thomas Wright. Once upon a time, I was a lot like you. Not the money part. Never had that kind of wealth. But the certainty, the pride, the belief that I had it all figured out. He took a sip of his coffee, staring out at the street. I was an engineer, worked for the big automotive companies back in the day, when Detroit was the center of the world. Had a family, a house in Grosse Pointe, the whole American dream. What happened? Life happened. My wife got sick, cancer. The insurance didn't cover everything, you know how it is. I started drinking to cope with the stress. Lost my job, lost my house, lost my family. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Been on these streets for 23 years now. Khalid felt his own problems suddenly seem less absolute. I'm sorry. Don't be. I made my choices. But I learned something out here that I never would have learned in my old life. Thomas turned to look at him directly. I learned that a man ain't defined by what he has or what he's lost. He's defined by what he does when everything's stripped away. That's when you see who someone really is. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the city move around them. Finally, Khalid spoke. I've lost everything, or I'm about to. My business, my reputation, my money, everything I built over 20 years. Gone in a week. Not everything, Thomas said quietly. You still got your mind, your skills, your experience. That stuff don't disappear just because the bank account does. He paused. And you got something else. Something maybe more important. You got the opportunity to rebuild without the burden of who you used to be. That's insane. I need to be who I was to get back what I lost. Do you? Thomas challenged. Or do you need to be someone new? Someone better? Khalid wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words. The coffee had gone cold in his hands. Tell me something, Thomas continued. All that money, all that success, did it make you happy, really happy, or did it just make you comfortable? It was a question Khalid had never allowed himself to ask. The answer, he realized with uncomfortable clarity, was the latter. What am I supposed to do? He asked. And for the first time, there was no arrogance in his voice, only genuine uncertainty. Well, first thing, you need a place to stay. There's a shelter 3 blocks from here, run by a good woman named Reverend Patricia. Tell her Thomas sent you. She'll find you a bed and a meal. A shelter. Khalid's pride flared briefly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You too good for that. Khalid thought about the homeless man's earlier words about pride being a prison. He shook his head. No, I'm not. Good. Second, you need to stop thinking about getting back what you lost and start thinking about what you're going to build from where you are. That's a different kind of thinking, requires a different kind of plan. Over the next few weeks, Khalid's life transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The shelter was humbling, a collection of cots in a converted warehouse, filled with people who had their own stories of loss and survival. But Reverend Patricia, a 60-year-old woman with an iron will and a heart of gold, took him under her wing. She gave him tasks, organizing supplies, helping serve meals, listening to people's stories. She put him to work. Thomas became an unlikely mentor. They met almost daily, sometimes at the shelter, sometimes on the street corners where Thomas spent his days. The old man's wisdom was unconventional but profound, drawn from decades of observation and hard-won experience. "You know your problem?" Thomas said one cold afternoon as they sat in a park, sharing a sandwich that Khalid had gotten from the shelter. "You've been playing a game where the points don't matter. Money's just a scorecard. It ain't the game itself." "Then what is the game?" "Impact, legacy, what you leave behind that matters to people who ain't you." Thomas gestured around them. "Look at this city. Detroit's been knocked down more times than a heavyweight boxer, but it keeps getting up. You know why? Because there's people here who refuse to let it die. They ain't got billions. Most of them ain't got thousands, but they got commitment. They got vision. They got love for something bigger than themselves." The words planted a seed in Khalid's mind. He started paying attention to the city in a new way, not as a developer looking for profit margins, but as someone trying to understand its soul. He talked to people at the shelter, heard their stories, learned about the challenges they faced. He walked through neighborhoods, saw the abandoned houses that could be homes, the empty lots that could be gardens, the broken community centers that could be rebuilt, and slowly, an idea began to form. 2 months after his world collapsed, Khalid got a call from his lawyer in Dubai. The investigation had concluded. The embezzled funds had been partially recovered, and while Khalid wouldn't get everything back, he would regain access to roughly 40% of his frozen assets. It was enough to settle his debts, enough to start over if he was careful. The old Khalid would have immediately begun trying to resurrect his empire, to reclaim his place in the international development world. But the man sitting in the shelter's common room that day was different. He found Thomas that afternoon at their usual spot. "I got some of my money back," Khalid said, sitting beside him. Thomas nodded slowly. "Congratulations. What you gonna do with it? I want to show you something." Khalid pulled out his laptop, now battered from weeks of nomadic existence. He opened a file that contained a detailed proposal. "I've been working on this. I want your opinion." What he showed Thomas was a plan for a completely different kind of development project. Instead of luxury towers, he had designed a mixed-use complex that would combine affordable housing, job training centers, and community spaces. The ground floor would house small businesses owned by local residents. The upper floors would contain apartments priced for working-class families. There would be a community kitchen, a tech center where people could learn computer skills, a health clinic. It was called the Renaissance Project, a nod to his original plan, but something entirely new. "The profit margins are smaller," Khalid explained. "Much smaller, but it's sustainable, and it's scalable. If it works here, it could work in other cities." Thomas studied the plans carefully, his weathered fingers tracing the architectural drawings. Finally, he looked up. "This is good. This is real good, but you're gonna need help. You can't do this alone." "I know. That's why I'm asking you to be my partner." Thomas laughed, then saw that Khalid was serious. "Man, I live on the street. What do I know about running a business? You know this city. You know its people. You understand what they need in a way I never could." Khalid met his eyes. "I have the technical skills and the capital. You have the wisdom and the connections. Together, we could actually make a difference." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There's something I gotta tell you first. Something I should have told you before." Khalid waited. "I ain't been completely honest with you. I am homeless, that part's true. But I also got a degree in urban planning from Michigan State, and I served on the city council for 6 years, back in the 90s, before everything fell apart. I know how the system works. I know who the players are. I've been watching this city try to rebuild for decades, and I seen what works and what don't." Khalid stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you wouldn't have listened. You needed to learn some things first. About yourself, about what really matters. If I'd told you who I was when you was still that arrogant businessman who couldn't see past his own reflection, you'd have just tried to use me like you used everyone else. But now," Thomas smiled, "now you actually see me. You see people. That's why this might actually work." The revelation was stunning, but somehow it made perfect sense. Khalid found himself laughing. A genuine, surprised laugh that felt like the first real emotion he'd expressed in years. "So what do you say?" Khalid asked. "Partners?" Thomas extended a gnarled hand. "Partners." The next year was a whirlwind of activity. Khalid and Thomas, an unlikely duo that raised eyebrows throughout Detroit's business community, worked tirelessly to bring the Renaissance Project to life. Thomas reconnected with old contacts in city government, while Khalid used his remaining funds and newly humbled approach to secure investors who believed in the vision. Reverend Patricia became their third partner, bringing her deep community ties and moral authority. Together, the three of them built something that transcended traditional development. They hired from the shelter, giving jobs to people who had been written off by society. They created training programs in partnership with local community colleges. They insisted that a percentage of the apartments be reserved for people transitioning out of homelessness. The first building broke ground on a cold March morning, exactly 1 year after Khalid had first encountered Thomas on that frozen street. Media coverage was extensive, not because of the money involved, which was modest by development standards, but because of the story. The billionaire who lost everything and the homeless man who helped him find something more valuable than wealth. At the groundbreaking ceremony, as Khalid stood with a golden shovel, surrounded by community members, city officials, and his partners, a reporter asked him, "Mr. Al-Rashid, do you regret what happened? The embezzlement, the loss of your empire?" Khalid looked over at Thomas, who was laughing with a group of kids from the neighborhood, and at Reverend Patricia, who was coordinating with construction managers. He thought about his old life, the empty luxury, the hollow victories, the loneliness disguised as success. "No," he said firmly, "I don't regret it at all. I thought I was successful before, but I was just wealthy. There's a difference. What happened to me, it wasn't a tragedy. It was a gift. It gave me the chance to build something that actually matters." The reporter pressed on. "But don't you miss the lifestyle? The private jets, the luxury hotels, the international acclaim?" Khalid smiled. "I sleep better now than I ever did in 5-star hotels. I wake up every morning knowing that what I'm doing will change lives, not just generate returns for investors. That's worth more than any amount of money." As the ceremony concluded, and people began to disperse, Thomas pulled Khalid aside. "You did good, brother," the old man said. "Real good." "We did good," Khalid corrected. "This was only possible because you took a chance on an arrogant fool who didn't know what he didn't know." "Nah, you just needed someone to hold up a mirror. We all do, sometime or another." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "The real test is what you do next. This is just the beginning." He was right, of course. The Renaissance Project was just the first step. Over the next 5 years, Khalid and his partners would develop 7 similar projects across Detroit and expand into 3 other Rust Belt cities. The model proved replicable and sustainable, creating thousands of jobs and housing units while maintaining enough profitability to attract socially conscious investors. But perhaps more importantly, it changed how people thought about development. Other cities began adopting similar approaches. The for-profit with purpose model began to gain traction, and at the center of it all was an unlikely partnership that had started with a cup of coffee on a frozen sidewalk. Thomas never moved into one of the apartments, despite Khalid's repeated offers. He said the streets were his home, and he wasn't ready to leave them yet. But he did take an office in the first completed building, a small space from which he coordinated community outreach and served as an advisor to residents. Kids from the neighborhood would stop by to do homework, drawn by the old man's patient wisdom and terrible jokes. Khalid, meanwhile, rented a modest apartment in the same building, eschewing the penthouse for a unit on the 3rd floor. He lived simply, saving most of his earnings to reinvest in new projects. His marriage ended, though amicably, as he and his wife acknowledged that they had been strangers living parallel lives. He began dating a social worker he met at the shelter, a woman who challenged him and made him laugh, who loved him for who he was, not what he owned. On the 5th anniversary of the Renaissance Project's groundbreaking, the team organized a community celebration. The original building and its surrounding complex were now fully occupied, thriving with life. The ground floor businesses, owned by residents, were profitable. Children played in the courtyard gardens that Thomas had designed. The job training center had helped over 2,000 people find employment. As Khalid stood on the roof of the building, watching the celebration below, he thought about that frozen December day when his world had collapsed, when a homeless man had offered him cryptic advice and a cup of coffee. He thought about the journey from pride to humility, from wealth to poverty, and back to something more valuable than either: purpose. Thomas joined him on the roof, moving slower these days, his health declining but his spirit undiminished. "Beautiful, ain't it?" the old man said, looking out over the city they had helped transform. "One building, one life at a time." "Yes," Khalid agreed. "It really is." "You know what the best part is?" Thomas continued. 5 years ago, when you showed up at my spot looking for answers, I knew you had it in you. I saw past the arrogance to the man you could be, but you had to see it too. That was the journey you needed to take. You helped me find my way, Khalid said quietly. No, brother. I just held up a mirror. You did the hard work of looking into it and being honest about what you saw. Thomas paused, then added with a mischievous grin, though I admit I had fun watching you squirm in that shelter those first few weeks. Khalid laughed. You're a cruel man, Thomas, right? Just cruel enough to love, Thomas replied, using one of his favorite phrases. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Detroit, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The city that had been dying when Khalid first arrived was now experiencing a genuine renaissance. Not the kind built on luxury towers and tax incentives for the wealthy, but the kind built on community, opportunity, and genuine care for people's lives. Below them, the celebration continued. Music drifted up from the courtyard. Children laughed. Families shared food. People who had once been strangers, separated by circumstances and prejudices, now lived as neighbors, united by a shared investment in each other's success. This was Khalid's legacy. Not the towers he had once dreamed of building, not the billions he had once commanded, but this: real people living better lives, communities healed, hope restored. It was messy and complicated and imperfect, but it was real. It mattered, and it had all started with a billionaire who lost everything, and a homeless man who had everything that really counted: wisdom, compassion, and the courage to reach out to a stranger in need. As darkness fell over the city, Khalid and Thomas descended from the roof to join the celebration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight was for celebrating what they had accomplished together, a testament to the transformative power of human connection, humility, and the willingness to see beyond the superficial markers of success to what really gives life meaning. The Arab billionaire had indeed been helped by a beggar, but the real surprise wasn't what the beggar did for him. It was what they did together. Two men from impossibly different worlds, united by shared humanity, and a vision of what could be when people chose compassion over profit, community over individual glory, and purpose over pride. That was the real plot twist. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what matters most, and that the help we need often comes from the most unexpected sources, if only we're humble enough to accept it. In the end, Khalid had come to Detroit seeking to build an empire. Instead, he found something far more valuable. He found himself, his purpose, and a brother in the most unlikely of places. And in doing so, he discovered that true